The alien giantess tried to eat me, but I tamed her hunger with a kiss. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The multi-tool whined a siren song of imminent fortune. Its needle-thin sensor quivering as it locked onto the energy signature had been chasing for 3 grueling weeks. Deep within the emerald hell of a planet that actively tried to digest anything that moved, this was the sound of a payday that could buy him a moon, or at least a very comfortable year avoiding places exactly like this. He moved with a liquid economy of motion, his worn leather flight gear creaking a familiar chorus against the cacophony of the jungle. A place where silence was a predator's best friend and noise was a victim's last mistake. His blaster pistol, a heavy, modified DT-18 that had seen him through skirmishes in asteroid belts and cantina brawls, felt like a comforting weight in his hand, a solid piece of reality in a world of suffocating, hallucinatory flora. Every rustle of the giant, fan-like leaves could be a razor-winged raptor, every shimmering pool of water a nesting ground for paralytic leeches the size of his forearm. He had learned the deadly rhythms of the subtle shifts in the humid air that preceded a toxic spore burst, the specific vibration in the soil that warned of a burrowing leviathan. Survival here was a constant, exhausting dance on the edge of a blade, and was a master of the choreography, driven by the allure of the crystalline power source that pulsed just a few hundred meters ahead, a prize worth any risk. The signal grew stronger, a high-pitched thrum that vibrated through the handle of the tool and up his arm, a promise of pure, uncut energy that the corporate prospectors in the outer systems would pay a king's ransom for, no questions asked. He pushed through a final curtain of thick, weeping vines, their sap smelling faintly of cinnamon and ozone, and stepped into a space that felt profoundly different, a place where the jungle's relentless chaos seemed to hold its breath. It was a clearing, unnaturally wide and circular, dominated by a series of colossal stone altars that jutted from the earth like broken teeth. They were ancient, by of rain and choked with thick, mossy growth that glowed with a faint phosphorescence in the dim light filtering through the canopy. The air here was still and heavy, carrying a strange, metallic tang that tickled the back of his throat. Scavenger instincts, honed by a decade of looting ruins and forgotten starships, went on high alert. This wasn't a natural formation. It was a construct, a place of purpose, and on a world as savage as purpose usually meant sacrifice. His eyes swept the area, his sly grin replaced by a taut line of concentration as he analyzed the scene, his mind cataloging the strange glyphs on the stones, the eerie symmetry of the layout, the unsettling quiet. The multi-tool in his hand screamed, the signal now so strong it was almost painful, indicating the power source was directly beneath the largest, central altar. Greed warred with caution, a familiar battle in his soul, and as it always did, greed landed a telling blow, urging him forward with visions of a clean ship, premium fuel, and a beautiful companion who didn't have mandibles. He took a single, confident step toward the central monolith, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, loamy earth. The world vanished from beneath him in a stomach-lurching drop. There was no sound, no snap of a trigger mechanism, only the sickening sensation of falling as the ground itself proved to be a lie, a carefully disguised covering over a deep pit. A heartbeat later, the fall was arrested with a brutal, whiplash-inducing jolt that drove the air from his lungs in a pained grunt. He was tangled, suspended, the jungle's vibrant greens and browns now a dizzying, inverted blur. A net woven from something that glinted with the cold, hard sheen of metal had ensnared him completely, hoisting him a dozen feet into the air to dangle like a piece of bait. He swore, a stream of curses aimed at his own foolishness, the planet and the universe in general, the words muffled by the press of the metallic strands against his face. He'd let the promise of the score blind him, made him forget the first rule of survival. If it looks too good to be true, it's a trap. He struggled against the bonds, his muscles straining, but the material was unyielding, its smooth, cool surface offering no purchase. The fibers were as thin as wire but possessed an impossible tensile strength. He twisted his body, trying to reach the knife sheathed at his boot, but the motion only caused him to spin slowly, giving him a panoramic, upside-down view of the clearing as figures began to emerge from the shadows of the colossal trees, their forms resolving out of the gloom like waking nightmares. They were giants, towering women, none shorter than 9 feet, with skin the color of burnished bronze and musculature that spoke of a life of constant, brutal struggle. They moved with a predatory grace that belied their immense size, their powerful legs carrying them across the clearing with silent, deliberate strides. Each one carried a spear tipped with sharpened obsidian or the serrated tooth of some monstrous creature, and their expressions were a uniform mask of stoic, unreadable appraisal. They were warriors, a tribe of them, and he was their catch. They formed a wide circle around his dangling form, their collective gaze analytical and unnervingly possessive. An older one, her wild, night-black hair streaked with shocks of silver, and her face a roadmap of old scars, stepped forward. She was clearly her presence radiating an aura of absolute authority that the others instinctively deferred to. She tilted her head, her eyes, the color of dark, polished jade, studying him with an intensity that made the hairs on his arms stand up. She grunted something in a low, guttural language, a command that was sharp and final, and pointed a finger the size of a small club directly at him. In response to her order, a younger warrior detached herself from the circle and began to walk toward him, the earth seeming to tremble slightly with each of her footfalls. She was the most striking of them all, a breathtaking vision of primal strength and savage beauty that made his heart hammer against his ribs for reasons that had nothing to do with his inverted predicament. She stood a full 10 feet tall, a perfect, voluptuous hourglass of bronze-skinned power, her wild black hair a chaotic mane that fell around her shoulders and down her back. But it was her eyes that seized his attention and held it captive. They were not a normal color but a luminous, glowing amber, shining with their own internal light like captured embers. As she drew closer, could see the fine details of her form, the subtle patterns of ritual scarring on her arms, the sheer, intimidating perfection of her physique. This was Amber, though he did not yet know her name, a creature of myth and legend brought to life. The other giantesses began a low, rhythmic chant, a single word repeated over and over, a sound that vibrated deep in his bones and spoke of ancient rites and a profound collective hunger. Amber stopped directly beneath him, her head tilted back as she gazed up at him, her expression a fascinating, terrifying mixture of genuine curiosity and raw, predatory intent. The chant of her tribe grew louder, more insistent, a drumbeat calling for the culmination of the ritual. With a fluid grace that was utterly hypnotic, she reached up, her large, powerful hands gripping the net. She lowered it slightly, just enough so that his head was level with hers, the metallic strands groaning in protest. He could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, smell the strange, earthy scent of her hair mixed with the wild perfume of the jungle. Then she leaned in close, her face filling his vision, those impossible amber eyes staring directly into his. She opened her mouth and his blood ran cold. Her teeth were not human. They were pearly white and perfectly formed, but her canines were slightly elongated, tapering to needle-sharp points, the dentition of a carnivore, of a being that was not just going to kill him, but was fully intent on eating him. The universe narrowed to the space between their faces, a scant few inches of humid air crackling with an almost tangible pressure. For suspended and helpless, the rhythmic, guttural chant of the giantesses faded into a dull, hypnotic drone, the background noise to his own impending demise. His mind, a machine honed for survival and rapid calculation, was running through scenarios at a speed that felt impossibly slow, each potential action leading to the same bloody conclusion. He could struggle, but the metallic vines held him like a fly in a steel web. He could scream, but that would only be a satisfying seasoning for the main course. He could beg, but the cold, analytical curiosity in those luminous amber eyes told him that mercy was not a concept these beings entertained. He saw his end reflected in those glowing orbs, a quick, brutal tearing of flesh, and then darkness. Yet as he stared past his own reflection, he saw something else flicker deep within their fiery depths, a subtle nuance that was more than just animalistic hunger. It was the unwavering focus of a predator, yes, but it was also the solemnity of a priestess, an expectation that went beyond simple sustenance. This was a test, a ritual sacrifice, and the spirit of the offering mattered. They didn't just want his life, they wanted his fear, his submission. They wanted him to break. A lifetime of defiance, of spitting in the face of grim odds, from the cargo bays of pirate vessels to the rigged gambling dens of forgotten asteroid colonies, surged through him in a final, electric tide. He was a scavenger, a rogue, a survivor who had always relied on his wits when his muscle failed, and he would not give this magnificent, terrifying creature the satisfaction of a cowering death. If he was going to die, it would be on his own terms, with a final gesture so completely insane, so utterly outside their savage comprehension, that they would remember the taste of his spirit long after his flesh was gone. The plan bloomed in his mind not as a strategy, but as a pure, instinctual impulse, a gambler's all-or-nothing throw when the stakes were his very soul. He would not meet her aggression with aggression she understood, nor would he meet it with the terror she expected. He would meet it with something so profoundly alien to her world of spear and fang that it would shatter the ritual itself. As her hot breath, smelling faintly of wild herbs and roasted meat, washed over his face, and those sharp, carnivorous teeth parted for the final, fatal bite, he stopped thinking and simply acted. He summoned every ounce of strength from his core, his muscles screaming in protest as he fought the unyielding grip of the net, surging his body upward in a desperate, lunging motion that felt like it was tearing him apart. The contact was a shockwave of sensation, a collision of worlds. His lips, chapped and dry from exertion, pressed against hers, which were unexpectedly soft and warm. It was not a kiss of passion or romance, but a brutal, desperate act of communication, a raw and silent scream that declared, "I am not your food. I am not your victim. I am a man, and this is how I fight." The universe held its breath. For a timeless second, there was only the pressure of their mouths, a defiant island of stillness in a sea of impending violence. The reaction was instantaneous and absolute. The relentless, hypnotic chant of the tribe cut off as if severed by a blade, the abrupt silence more deafening than the noise it replaced. A collective gasp, a sound like 100 winds being knocked out of 100 giant lungs, echoed through the clearing. Amber herself froze completely, her entire 10-foot frame rigid with a shock so profound it was almost paralytic. Her glowing eyes, moments before narrowed in predatory focus, widened into luminous, amber saucers of pure, unadulterated disbelief. He felt a tremor run through her powerful body, a shiver of utter confusion that had nothing to do with cold and everything to do with a fundamental law of her reality being irrevocably broken. He pulled back, his lungs burning for air, a ragged grin stretching his lips, a mask of audacious confidence he did not feel. He met her stunned gaze and held it, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The predatory intent in her expression was gone, shattered into a million glittering fragments and replaced by a storm of warring emotions. First came the shock, then a wave of deep, furrowed confusion, as if her mind was struggling to categorize the input, to fit this unprecedented action into any known context of combat, submission, or ritual. She took an involuntary step back, her hands dropping from the net as if it had suddenly become white-hot. Her lips, the ones he had just touched, parted slightly as she drew a shaky breath. The entire tribe was a gallery of stunned statues, their spears held motionless, their mouths agape. They stared at Amber, then at their expressions a mixture of outrage and awe. The sacred ritual, an ancient tradition passed down through countless generations, had been utterly defiled by this small, soft-skinned creature, and yet it had been done with a courage no one could deny. The stern took a half-step forward, her face a thunderous mask of fury, a low growl rumbling in her chest. She barked a sharp, questioning word at Amber, a command demanding an explanation, demanding that she finish the rite and restore order. Amber did not look at her mother. Her glowing gaze remained locked on, a million thoughts seemingly passing behind her eyes. He had not fought her with strength, for he had none to match hers. He had not begged for his life, for he clearly valued his pride more. He had faced the certainty of being devoured and had responded not with a weapon of the flesh, but a weapon of the soul, an act of such baffling defiance it had completely disarmed her. In her culture, a strong spirit was to be respected, even in an enemy. It was the core tenet of their rituals, the belief that consuming a worthy foe transferred some of that spiritual strength. This small being, this man, possessed a spirit so strange and so potent that it had single-handedly broken their most sacred tradition without shedding a single drop of blood. A new emotion began to dawn in her eyes, eclipsing the confusion. A flicker of profound, undeniable fascination, a dawning respect for the creature that had so thoroughly outmaneuvered her on a battlefield she hadn't even known existed. The repeated her command, her voice sharper this time, laced with impatience and anger. The tribe began to murmur, the spell of silence broken, their voices a low buzz of uncertainty and debate. Amber finally tore her gaze from and turned to face her leader, her expression now set with a resolve that was as unshakable as the stone altars around them. She stood tall, her immense height seeming to grow even more imposing, and spoke a single, clear word in her guttural tongue, a word that was not part of any ritual new but whose meaning was unmistakable in its finality. A shockwave of disbelief rippled through the assembled warriors. One of them, a fierce giantess with a jagged scar across her lip, stepped forward and spat a furious objection, but the silenced her with a raised hand, her jade-green eyes narrowed in displeasure, not at the rival but at Amber. After a long, tense moment, the old leader gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod of grudging acceptance. Amber turned back too, a new light in her eyes, not of hunger but of ownership. She gestured to two of the other warriors, who approached with large, obsidian knives. For a terrifying moment he thought his gambit had failed, but instead of slitting his throat, they began to methodically cut the metallic vines of the net. He dropped to the ground, landing in a heap at the foot of the giantess who had almost been his end, and was now, it seemed, his beginning. The ritual was over, but his trial had just begun. Being claimed was a state far removed from salvation, a nuanced form of captivity that was both safer and more humiliating than being a simple prisoner. Learned this in the long, quiet days that followed the broken ritual. A collar of smooth, black stone, cool and heavy, was fastened around his neck, a beautiful, polished symbol of his status as Amber's property, a living trophy from a contest no one understood. He was not caged or bound, but he was never truly free, his world confined to the limits of the village, a collection of sturdy, open-air structures woven from the living wood of the giant trees and built around the central clearing of altars. The other warriors treated him with a spectrum of disdain that ranged from cold indifference to overt hostility. He was a disruption, a peculiar pet belonging to a warrior who had forsaken tradition for a moment of incomprehensible impulse. The giantess with the lip and eyes like chips of flint made her contempt particularly clear, often making loud, mocking comments in her guttural tongue to her companions, her gaze flicking towards as she spoke of weak, soft-skinned things and the foolishness of keeping them. The children of the tribe, however, saw him as a source of endless fascination, sometimes creeping close to stare at his strange clothes and pale skin before their mothers would sharply call them away, as if his foreignness were a contagion. His relationship with Amber was a strange and silent dance of proximity and distance. She was his keeper, ensuring he was fed with roasted meats and strange, starchy fruits, and that he had a dry place to sleep beneath an overhanging shelter. Yet, she rarely spoke to him, her glowing amber eyes often watching him from across the central fire with a look of profound, possessive confusion, as if she were still trying to solve the puzzle of his existence. He was hers, this much was clear, but she did not know what to do with the prize she had won. For his part, fell back on the instincts that had kept him alive for years. He observed, he listened, and he learned. He began to piece together the language, a tongue of deep, resonant consonants and clipped vowels. He studied their social structure, the clear lines of authority flowing from the fierce but respectful rivalries between the warriors, the deep communal bond that held their society together against the relentless hostility of the planet. He watched them train, their massive bodies moving with a lethal grace as they sparred with spears and heavy, stone-headed clubs, and he knew with absolute certainty that his survival here would never be a matter of physical confrontation. His life hung by the single, tenuous thread of Amber's continued fascination, and he understood that fascination, like any novelty, would eventually fade. He had to find a way to become more than a curiosity. He had to become useful. His opportunity arrived with the encroaching darkness of the night, which fell not with a gentle fade but like a thick black shroud dropped over the jungle. With the darkness came the skulkers. His first experience with them was a sudden eruption of chaos at the village perimeter. An eerie, high-pitched chittering echoed from the trees, a sound that made his skin crawl, and in an instant the peaceful village transformed into an armed camp. The warriors moved with practiced urgency, grabbing their spears and forming a defensive wall of bronze flesh and sharpened obsidian. From the gloom emerged a pack of sleek, six-legged predators, their bodies disturbingly fluid as they moved with blistering speed. Their hides were a glossy black, but intricate, shifting patterns of eerie green bioluminescence pulsed along their flanks, creating a confusing, hypnotic light show designed to disorient their prey. They were not large enough to challenge a warrior one-on-one, but they were relentlessly aggressive, attacking in a coordinated swarm of claws and fangs. The battle was a maelstrom of violent motion, the fighting with disciplined fury, their spears lancing out to impale the darting creatures while their powerful roars shook the clearing. Amber was a terrifying force of nature in the fray, her spear a blur of motion, each strike a definitive, fatal blow. Was herded to the center of the village by one of the older females, forced to watch the brutal conflict, feeling the familiar, bitter sting of his own physical inadequacy in this land of giants. They drove the pack back into the jungle, but not before one warrior cried out, clutching a forearm that was bleeding profusely from a deep, venomous gash. They were victorious, as they always were, but their victory was once again written in their own blood. Watch the injured warrior being tended to, her bronze skin pale around the wound as the tribe's shaman applied a poultice of mashed leaves. This happened every few nights, a bloody, repetitive tax paid to the planet for the privilege of existing. As the adrenaline of the attack subsided, his analytical mind began to work, replaying the scene not as a warrior, but as a strategist. He had noticed something during the chaotic fight, a detail the focused entirely on the violence before them had overlooked. The skulkers, for all their aggression, never made a concerted push into the village proper. Their attacks were focused entirely on the perimeter, specifically in the areas near the large, faintly glowing energy stones that provided the settlement with warmth and a soft, ambient light. They would dash in, strike at the defenders, and then retreat as if they were tethered to the edges of the clearing. His curiosity piqued. He retrieved his multi-tool from his pack, a piece of gear Amber had grudgingly returned to him after days of his persistent, gesturing requests. He kept his distance from the who viewed the device with superstitious suspicion and scanned one of the large energy stones. The tool chirped, confirming his suspicion. The stones emitted a steady, low-frequency thermal and sonic signature, a beacon of warmth and energy in the cool jungle night. The skulkers weren't just hunting they were drawn to this signature like moths to a flame, their predatory instincts triggered by the promise of heat and life. He knew he had a solution, a plan that was both audacious and elegant, but communicating it was another challenge altogether. He approached Amber as she was cleaning her spear, her brow furrowed in thought. He used the few words of her language he knew, supplementing them with drawings in the dirt and frantic gestures. He pointed to the energy stones, then to the jungle where the skulkers had attacked, then mimicked the chittering sound of the creatures. He then activated his multi-tool, showing her the fluctuating energy wave on its small screen. At first, she looked at him with impatience, her mind still on the battle and her wounded comrade, but was persistent, tapping the device, then drawing a long line in the dirt leading away from the village and into a deep, narrow ravine that bordered their territory to the north. He sketched the shapes of the skulkers following this line, falling into the ravine, trapped. Understanding slowly dawned in her glowing amber eyes, her skepticism warring with a nascent curiosity. To trust his strange noises and lightbox over generations of proven combat strategy was a significant leap of faith. The ridicule from and the others was immediate when Amber retrieved scavenger pack and allowed him to tinker with its contents. They saw it as the warrior indulging the games of her peculiar little pet. Amber ignored them, her gaze fixed on as he worked with a focused intensity she had never seen in him before. He salvaged a sonic emitter, a power cell, and a frequency modulator, combining his advanced components with pieces of material, a hollowed-out gourd for a resonance chamber, conductive sap for wiring insulation. It was a strange hybrid of futuristic technology and primitive craftsmanship, a perfect reflection of its creator's situation. As twilight once again began to bleed across the sky, they put the plan into action. Under Amber's direction, several warriors reluctantly followed them to the edge of the deep ravine, placed his device on a rock overlooking the chasm and activated it. It emitted a low, almost subsonic hum, a thrumming vibration that mimicked the signature of the energy stones but amplified it, pulsing it directionally into the jungle. Then, they waited in the tense, humming silence. The jungle darkened, and soon the familiar chilling chittering began to echo from the trees. The warriors gripped their spears, their muscles tensed for the expected assault on the village. But the attack never came. Instead, a faint green glow became visible through the trees, a moving constellation of bioluminescent light that was not heading toward the village, but directly toward the source of the hum. A few moments later, the first skulker burst from the undergrowth, its eyes fixated on the decoy. It was followed by another, and then a dozen more, the entire pack swarming mindlessly toward the irresistible lure. They scrambled over the rocks, heedless of their surroundings, and plunged one by one into the deep ravine, their surprised yelps echoing as they fell into the natural trap. The clearing remained untouched, the village silent and safe. The warriors stared from the decoy to the ravine, and then to the small human, their expressions of scorn slowly melting into grudging astonishment. Amber looked down at the firelight from the village catching the strange device in his hands, and for the first time, her glowing amber eyes held not just fascination or possession, but a clear, bright spark of profound respect. The successful gambit with the skulkers had purchased something far more valuable than his life. It had bought him relevance. In the days that followed, the atmosphere within the village underwent a subtle but significant transformation, the currents of opinion shifting around him like a slow-moving tide. The overt hostility from the other warriors cooled into a wary, watchful curiosity, their scorn replaced by a grudging acknowledgement that the strange, small creature Amber had claimed possessed a different, and perhaps not entirely useless, kind of strength. Even's derisive sneers seemed to lose their conviction, her insults now lacking the enthusiastic support of her peers, leaving her sounding more bitter than commanding. The who had previously dismissed him with the imperious indifference one might grant a piece of uninteresting livestock, now observed him with a new, calculating intensity, her jade-green eyes following him as he moved through the village, her mind clearly working to categorize this new, unproven asset. The stone collar around his neck remained a constant, heavy reminder of his status, but its symbolic weight had changed. It was less the brand of a pet and more the marker of a protected, albeit still captive, anomaly whose true purpose had yet to be determined. This shift was most profoundly felt in his interactions with Amber, where the invisible barrier of captor and captive had begun to irrevocably crumble. The possessiveness in her gaze remained, a fierce, unwavering fire that declared him hers to the entire tribe, but it was now mingled with a burgeoning pride, the way a craftsman might admire a strange but effective tool of their own creation. She no longer left him to his own devices for long stretches of the day, but actively sought him out, a silent invitation to share the space around the fire or the shade of a large dwelling. It was during these quiet moments that the slow, often clumsy, process of building a bridge between their two vastly different worlds began. Their communication started as a simple, patient exchange, a pantomime of meaning that was sometimes frustrating, but often tinged with a heartwarming levity. He would point his data slate at a cooking pot and speak the word fire, and she would repeat it, her deep, resonant voice struggling to form the unfamiliar sounds, a small, amused smile touching her lips at her own attempts. In return, she would tap her massive spear with a single, elegant finger and say, patiently correcting his clumsy, flattened pronunciation until he could say it with at least a semblance of accuracy, the shared laughter at his failures becoming a language all its own. It was during one of these lessons, as felt emboldened by their growing rapport, that he decided to probe the memory that still haunted the edges of his thoughts. He pieced together a question using the rudimentary vocabulary they now shared, combining her words for hunger, spirit, and the first time, while pointing to his own mouth and then hers. A shadow passed over her expressive features, and for a moment he thought he had crossed a line, but then she sighed, a sound like the shifting of ancient stones, and began to explain. She spoke slowly, using simple terms and gestures, describing the great hunger not as a need for sustenance, but as a sacred ritual to test the spirit of an enemy, a captive, or an offering to the planet itself. A worthy spirit, she explained, would fight, would show its strength and its fire even in the face of certain oblivion, and in consuming such a being, the believed they honored that strength and absorbed a fraction of it. To die screaming or cowering was to have a weak spirit, to be a meaningless meal, but to die with defiance was to be a worthy sacrifice. No one in the history of their tribe, however, had ever shown defiance in the way he had. His action, the kiss, was so completely outside the known spectrum of courage or resistance that it had not just proven his spirit, but had redefined the test itself, leaving her with no other choice according to the most ancient interpretations of their law, but to claim the spirit that had so thoroughly conquered the ritual. The revelation washed over with the force of a physical blow, recontextualizing the terror of that first encounter into something far more complex, a deep and abiding piece of her culture that he had, through a desperate, impulsive act, both violated and fulfilled. Their shared vocabulary grew, and with it, the depth of their exchanges. The evenings became their own private sanctuary, a time when the rest of the tribe was occupied with their own affairs, and they could sit by a small, secluded fire, the vast difference in their sizes seeming to shrink in the intimacy of the flickering light. He introduced her properly to the magic of his data slate, moving beyond simple words to show her the universe that existed beyond her world's thick, green canopy. He pulled up stellar maps, vast and intricate webs of light, and explained that each pinpoint was a sun, many of which had their own worlds circling them, just like. Her glowing eyes, wide with a wonder that was almost childlike, reflected the swirling colors of a distant nebula he showed her, her massive finger gently, hesitantly tracing the image of a spiral galaxy on the small screen. He showed her schematics of the freighter he had once called home, explaining how vessels of metal and fire could break the chains of gravity and sail the star-strewn darkness between worlds. For a being whose entire existence had been defined by the ground beneath her feet, it was a fundamental reordering of reality, a concept so vast and beautiful it left her speechless. In return, she shared her world with him, not in images, but in practice. She began to take him on her patrols along the village perimeter, her presence a silent warning to any warrior who might still see him as a target for casual cruelty. She taught him the secrets of the jungle, showing him which brightly colored fungi were a potent medicine and which were a swift poison, how to read the subtle press of a leaf to know what creature had passed by, and how to find clean water deep within the stems of thick, fibrous plants. He saw her in her element, a warrior, yes, but also a naturalist, a caretaker, and a creature in perfect, deadly harmony with her savage environment, and his admiration for her deepened into something far more profound than mere gratitude for his life. In these quiet moments of shared discovery, their own personal histories began to surface. He spoke of the life he had led among the stars, a solitary existence born from a past betrayal by a partner who had sold him out for a pittance, a lesson that had taught him to trust no one but himself. She, in turn, confessed a deep-seated fear that she rarely dared to voice, a concern that her people's immense strength and unwavering adherence to tradition had also become a form of blindness, leaving them unable to adapt to threats that couldn't be met with a spear. This quiet admission, this shared vulnerability, was the final catalyst, transforming their fragile alliance into the foundations of a genuine, if unspoken, bond of trust and affection. Yet it was on one of their excursions into the deeper jungle that a discordant note was struck, a hint of a mystery that lay beyond the dangers they both understood. Scavenger instincts, momentarily lulled by his new reality, flared back to life when he saw it. A cluster of colossal ironwood trees, felled not by storm or rot, but sheared off at the base with a clean, almost surgical precision that left the stumps unnaturally smooth. Further on, his foot struck something hard, and digging in the dirt, he unearthed a twisted shard of metal. It was light but incredibly dense, and when he scanned it with his multi-tool, the device registered it as a complex composite alloy he had never encountered, a material far beyond the capabilities of and completely alien to the common technologies found in the outer systems. He showed it to Amber, a sense of deep unease prickling his skin. She examined the shard with mild curiosity before dismissing it, suggesting it was perhaps a piece of a fallen star, a strange anomaly in a world already full of them. For her, the only threats were the ones with teeth and claws, the tangible dangers of, but held the strange metal in his hand, feeling a familiar, cold dread. He had spent his life picking through the wreckage left by greater powers, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they were not alone in this jungle. Something else was here, something with advanced technology and a hidden purpose, and for the first time since his capture, he felt a fear that was not for himself, but for the giantess who now stood as his protector, and for the entire tribe that was living, unknowingly, in the shadow of an unseen god. The shard of alien metal became an obsession, a cold, dense secret that kept tucked away in his scavenger's pack, its mere presence a constant, nagging dissonance in the predictable rhythms of his new life. While they saw their world as a brutal but straightforward contest of strength against nature, now saw a hidden variable, a ghost in the machine that hinted at a game with rules he did not know and players he could not see. He began to spend his days in a state of quiet, focused investigation, using his multi-tool to take surreptitious readings of the soil, the water, and the very air, compiling a mental map of anomalies that no one else seemed to notice. There were faint, fluctuating energy fields in the deep woods that had no natural source, strange isotopic decay signatures in the bedrock that suggested the use of advanced power systems, and subtle, repeating patterns in the growth and decay of the colossal flora that spoke of artificial influence rather than organic chaos. He tried to explain his concerns to Amber, showing her the erratic readings on his screen and the smooth, unnatural surfaces of the felled trees, but his words were lost in the vast gulf between their perspectives. She would listen with a patient, indulgent fondness, but her glowing amber eyes held no real comprehension of the threat he was trying to describe. For her, a danger that could not be seen, smelled, or fought with a spear was no danger at all, merely a strange fixation of the clever, small man she had grown to care for. Her world was one of tangible realities, of skulker claws and venomous thorns, and his talk of invisible fields and strange metals was as abstract and meaningless as his stories of distant, uncaring stars. His unease into a cold, hard certainty when a sickness swept through the village, a debilitating fever that laid low several warriors, including one of the elders. The tribe's shaman worked tirelessly, applying ancient poultices and chanting solemn invocations, but the illness was unnaturally virulent, resisting their traditional remedies. While Amber was consumed with worry for her people, took a water sample from the stream that served as the village's primary source and analyzed it. The multi-tools bioscanner chirped a frantic, alarming report, identifying a complex, synthetic microbe that had been engineered with terrifying precision to attack this unique physiology. It wasn't a natural plague. It was a weapon, a targeted biological agent designed to cull and control. This was the final piece of evidence he needed, the undeniable proof that some external, intelligent force was actively manipulating their lives and their deaths. He confronted Amber that evening, his usual easygoing demeanor gone, replaced by a raw, desperate urgency. He held the data slate before her, its screen displaying the menacing, spiky form of the artificial microbe, and he explained with a grim finality in his voice that this was not the work of the planet but a deliberate attack. He insisted, with a forcefulness he had never used with her before, that she accompany him into the jungle to find the source of these anomalies, appealing not to her understanding of his technology, but to her instincts as a protector of her tribe. He argued that a hidden enemy who used sickness as a weapon was a coward, a foe whose poison needed to be traced to its fount, a logic that finally resonated with her warrior's code. A flicker of doubt, the first true crack in her unwavering faith in the tangible world, appeared in her eyes, and with a solemn, reluctant nod, she agreed to his hunt. They set out at dawn, moving away from the familiar hunting grounds and into a sector of the jungle that they generally avoided, a place the tribal elders called the Silent Wood. As they traveled deeper, understood the name, the usual cacophony of alien insects and distant animal calls faded away, replaced by a profound and unsettling quiet. The very air grew still and heavy, and the vibrant greens of the jungle gave way to a sickly, anemic pallor. Giant trees stood in eerie, geometric patterns of decay, their bark slewing off in great sheets to reveal wood that was rotting from the inside out. His multi-tool, which he kept clutched in his hand like a talisman, began to hum with increasing intensity, its sensors detecting a powerful, localized energy field that was warping the very environment around them. Amber, for her part, had grown tense, her spear held at the ready, her magnificent form moving with a new, heightened caution. Her senses, though not attuned to technology, could feel the profound wrongness of this place, the unnatural stillness that was not peace, but the absolute absence of life. After hours of tense tracking, the signal on his device spiked, pointing directly ahead. He pushed through a final screen of lifeless vines and stopped dead, his breath catching in his throat. In the center of a small, dead clearing lay the source. It was a craft of some kind, roughly 20 feet long, a shard of midnight embedded in the forest floor. Its shape was a nightmare of non-Euclidean angles, its surface a matte black material that seemed to absorb the light, creating an unnerving patch of pure void. It wasn't just crashed, it was partially buried, as if it had been there for a very long time, yet no moss or vine grew upon its alien hull. Amber let out a low, guttural sound of pure astonishment, her skepticism evaporating in the face of this impossible object, this thing that radiated a silent, technological menace that made the most fearsome jungle predator seem like a harmless pet. Approached the object cautiously, his multi-tool now emitting a steady, high-pitched tone. The craft was cloaked, not with a visual distortion field but with a more sophisticated sensory-dampening technology that had been failing over time, allowing the energy signatures to bleed out. It was this decay that he had been tracking across the jungle. He ran his hand over the surface of the hull. It was cool to the touch and unnervingly smooth, without any seam, rivet, or weld. As he circled the silent, alien drone, he found a small, damaged section where the impact of its crash had peeled back a layer of the outer casing, revealing the intricate, glowing circuitry beneath. A maintenance hatch, almost invisible to the naked eye, was slightly ajar. Prying it open with the tip of his knife, he revealed a cramped interior filled with technology so advanced it might as well have been magic. At the heart of the machine was a crystalline data core, pulsing with a soft, internal light. This was it, the brain, the source of all his answers and all his fears. He knew that accessing it was a monumental risk. Alien systems were often protected by lethal countermeasures, but the potential reward, the truth, was too great to ignore. He explained the danger to Amber in a low, urgent voice, and she responded by planting herself firmly between him and the jungle, her spear held in a defensive stance, her glowing eyes scanning the silent trees. She was his guard, his wall of bronze and muscle, and with her watchfulness granting him a sliver of peace, he set to work. The interface was unlike anything he had ever seen, but logic, he reasoned, was universal. He spent the next hour in a state of intense concentration, his fingers flying as he jury-rigged a connection between his own data slate and the alien core, writing script on the fly to bypass layers of encrypted security that were light years beyond his own technology, a process that felt less like hacking and more like trying to pick a god's pocket. Finally, with a soft chime from his data slate, he was in. The screen flickered to life, displaying streams of alien glyphs that resolved into a language he could, with his device's help, begin to translate. The information that flooded his screen was a torrent of cold, clinical horror, a truth so monstrous it threatened to unmake his entire understanding of the world. The data logs, designated under a project title that translated roughly to Preservation Initiative, laid everything bare. The drone was an automated ecological regulator, one of many, deployed by a species referred to only as the Collectors. Was not a naturally occurring death world. It was a meticulously managed preserve, a living laboratory. They were not just inhabitants, they were the primary subjects of a long-term study. The logs detailed, with chilling scientific detachment, the periodic introduction of predatory population control agents, complete with a video file showing the deployment of the very skulker creatures they had fought. The introduction of the synthetic microbe as a means to test this immune response and to prevent their population from exceeding optimal study parameters. The planet's ecosystem, its hyperaggression, its sudden plagues, the very savagery that had forged them into the perfect warriors they were, was all an artificial construct, a carefully calibrated system designed to keep them strong, primitive, and perpetually trapped in a brutal cycle of survival, preventing them from ever developing a civilization that might challenge the experiment. Hands grew cold as he read on, his mind reeling from the implications. He and Amber were not standing in a jungle on a savage world. They were standing in a cage, a terrarium the size of a planet, and the unseen collectors were the dispassionate scientists, staring down at them through the glass. He slowly lowered the data slate, his face pale with a horror that went bone deep, and looked up at Amber. He didn't need to speak. She saw the truth in his eyes, and in that silent, dead clearing, surrounded by the evidence of their imprisonment, the last vestiges of her world shattered completely. The journey back to the village was a silent, suffocating procession through a world that had become a lie. Every towering tree, every rustling predator, every beautiful, deadly blossom now seemed like a carefully placed prop on an impossibly large stage, its natural wonder tainted by the cold, clinical purpose had uncovered. The jungle was no longer their home. It was their prison, and the weight of that knowledge pressed down on them, heavier than the humid air. Amber walked with a rigid, controlled fury, the fluid grace of the huntress replaced by the stiff gait of a soldier marching toward an unknown battle. Her entire existence, the history of her people, the sacred struggles of her ancestors, had been a performance for an unseen audience, their victories and losses nothing more than data points in a detached, cosmic experiment. The shock of this revelation was rapidly crystallizing within her into a cold, diamond-hard rage, a feeling so pure and potent it eclipsed all the fear and grief that lay beneath it. Walking beside her, felt the grim burden of the messenger. He had torn away the veil of her reality, and now he had to convince an entire tribe of proud warriors that their gods were zookeepers and their world was a cage. He had faced down pirates and crime lords, but the prospect of standing before thee and telling her that her entire culture was a sham was perhaps the most daunting challenge of his life. Yet within him, a familiar, defiant spark flickered. He had always been the underdog, the scavenger living in the cracks of larger systems, and this was simply the largest system he had ever encountered. Their arrival in the village clearing sent ripples of unease through the tribe. It was not their presence, but their demeanor that silenced the daily activity. The grim set of Amber's jaw and the stark, unsmiling intensity on his face spoke of a discovery far more significant than any hunting trophy. They emerged from her dwelling, her jade-green eyes narrowing as she took in her daughter's thunderous expression. Without a word, she gestured toward the central fire, the silent command for a council clear to all. The senior warriors gathered, their massive forms creating a formidable circle, their faces a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Was prominent among them, her lip curled in a preemptive sneer, ready to discredit whatever strange tale the outsider had concocted this time. With Amber standing at his side, her presence a silent shield of bronze and conviction, began. He held up his data slate, its screen glowing in the dusk, and through Amber's clipped, forceful translation, he laid the terrible truth bare. He showed them the drone's logs, the cold, scientific language detailing their manipulation. He played the visual file, and a collective gasp went through the tribe as they watched a silent, holographic image of a collector vessel deploying the skulker pods into their jungle. He showed them the molecular breakdown of the engineered plague, a poison designed specifically for their blood. The reaction was not the shock of belief, but the fury of denial. A wave of angry, disbelieving shouts erupted from the assembled warriors. They accused him of trickery, of using his glowing box to conjure lies. His voice rose above the others, accusing him of being a spy, a saboteur sent by some unknown enemy to poison their minds and break their spirit with cowardly fictions. The council teetered on the brink of violence, the warriors' hands tightening on their spears as they advanced on the small human who dared to mock their history. The remained silent, her face a mask of stone, her lack of intervention a terrifying omen. Just as it seemed they would reject the truth and kill the messenger, Amber stepped forward, placing herself in front of. She did not raise her voice, but her words, spoken in the pure, resonant tongue of her people, cut through the angry din with the sharpness of a razor. She spoke not as a translator, but as a witness, her voice ringing with the absolute authority of a warrior who had seen the truth with her own eyes. She described the unnatural silence of the dead woods, the sight of the impossible machine buried in the earth, a thing so alien and advanced that it made their strongest spears look like children's toys. She confessed her own disbelief, her own refusal to accept such a monstrous reality, until she had seen the irrefutable proof within the machine's memory. She staked her blood, her honor, and her position as a warrior of thee on the truth of words. Her passionate, unwavering conviction struck the tribe like a physical blow, her sincerity and fierce loyalty to her people an undeniable force. The angry shouts subsided into uncertain murmurs, and for the first time the warriors looked at the images on its data slate not as trickery, but as a terrifying possibility. The finally stirred, her gaze shifting from her daughter's defiant face to steady one, a long, silent appraisal that held the fate of them all in the balance. With a fragile, grudging silence now holding the council, pressed his advantage, laying out the framework of his audacious plan. He explained that the crashed drone they had found was a regulator, a passive observer, and that its failure to report back would inevitably trigger an investigation by a different kind of machine, an active, armed hunter drone. Their unseen enemy would soon be sending a wolf to see what had happened to their sheepdog. To hide or to fight it with spears would be equally useless, confirming their status as primitive subjects and likely resulting in their swift annihilation. Their only hope, he argued, was to do the unexpected, to demonstrate a level of cunning that the collector's data would have deemed impossible. He proposed that they would not destroy the incoming drone, but capture it, seize it intact, an act of defiance that would turn their enemy's technology against them. The idea was met with incredulous stares. This every instinct, honed by of savage survival, screamed for direct, overwhelming confrontation. The concept of setting a trap for a flying metal demon, of choosing capture over destruction, was a foreign, almost cowardly way of thinking. Countered their skepticism with cold logic, arguing that their strength was a known quantity to the collectors, a variable already factored into the experiment. Their intelligence, their ability to strategize and use technology, was the one weapon they possessed that their enemy would never see coming. He laid out the specifics of the trap, a masterful fusion of his technical knowledge and their brute strength. They would use the salvaged power core and communication module from the crashed drone to create a powerful energy lure, a fake signal that would mimic a catastrophic failure, drawing the hunter drone to a precise location. That location would be a narrow canyon near the village, a natural kill box where the drone's maneuverability would be limited. And waiting there, hidden among the rock walls, would be a series of massive nets, woven from the same metallic vines that had once held him, but reinforced and anchored to colossal rock falls, ready to be triggered at the perfect moment. After a long, tense silence that stretched for an eternity, the rose to her full, intimidating height. Her eyes, which had been fixed on, held a new, unfamiliar light. She saw not a small, weak outsider, but a mind that saw battlefields in a way her people never could. She gave a single, sharp nod. The plan was approved. In the days that followed, the village was transformed into a disciplined, focused army, and the fragile alliance between and Amber was forged into an unbreakable partnership. He was the architect of the impossible, scrambling to modify the alien components, his hands and mind working in a feverish harmony as he constructed the lure. She was his general, the conduit for his plans, her powerful voice translating his complex technical needs into clear, simple orders that her warriors could understand and execute. She directed the weaving of the nets, a task that required the coordinated strength of dozens of, and oversaw the Herculean effort of hauling them into position high on the canyon walls. There was no longer any question of their bond. They moved and thought as one, his mind and her might intertwined in a single, desperate purpose. On the third night, the lure was activated, and they waited. The tension was a palpable thing, a coiling serpent in the moonless dark. Then a silent, predatory shape blotted out the stars. The hunter drone, a sleek, menacing wedge of black alloy, drifted into view, its single, glowing red optic scanning the jungle below. It followed the false signal without hesitation, its silent anti-gravity drive carrying it deep into the narrow canyon. As it hovered over the source of the lure, its optic glowing brightly as it scanned the crashed components they had laid out as bait, Amber rose from her hiding place and let out a war cry that echoed like a thunderclap from the stone walls. It was the signal. With a collective, deafening roar, the warriors heaved on their tethers, releasing the anchors. The massive rock falls gave way, and the metallic nets plunged downwards, blanketing the drone in a web of incredible strength. The machine reacted instantly, its engines flaring with a deafening shriek, and its energy cannons firing wild, blue bolts of plasma that vaporized chunks of the canyon wall. For a terrifying moment, it seemed it would tear itself free, but they held their lines, their muscles straining against the thrashing of the captured machine, their combined strength pitted against its advanced technology. With a final, grinding groan of stressed metal, the drone's engine sputtered and died, its light flickered out, and it fell the final few feet to the canyon floor, tangled, helpless, and silent. They stared, breathless and awestruck, at their prize. The invisible enemy now had a face, and they had just punched it. And Amber stood side by side on the canyon rim, the quiet hum of his scavenged technology and the panting breaths of her warriors the only sounds in the night, a shared victory glowing between them. The victory in the canyon did not bring the wild, roaring celebration might have expected. Instead, a deep, solemn sense of awe descended upon the captured hunter drone, silent and tangled in its web of metallic vines, was hauled back to the central clearing with a reverence usually reserved for a fallen god. It was both a trophy and a terrifying effigy, a tangible piece of the invisible enemy they had fought their entire existence without ever knowing it. The warriors, who had faced down every monster their world could conjure, would circle the inert machine, their massive hands tentatively reaching out to touch its cold, alien hull, their expressions a mixture of triumph and profound unease. They had won a battle, but the nature of the war had changed so fundamentally that their old instincts were now obsolete. Their world had expanded beyond the jungle, and they now looked to the sky not with superstition, but with a new, defiant awareness. The age of the as specimens was over. The age of the as a people had begun, and its first, uncertain dawn was breaking in the shadow of their captured foe. However, felt none of their quiet reverence. For him, the drone was not a symbol. It was a weapon, a tool, and a ticking clock. He knew the collectors would not simply write off a sophisticated piece of their technology without a response, and he worked with a frantic, focused energy that left him little time for sleep or food. With Amber as his constant shadow, his guard, and his assistant, he spent days meticulously dismantling the drone's access panels, his multi-tool whining as he probed its complex alien systems. He was not just studying it. He was searching for its voice, the long-range transmitter he knew it had to possess. His plan was not to wait for the enemy's next move, but to make his own, to force their hand on his terms. Amber, in a testament to how far they had come, became an extension of his will, her powerful fingers gently prying open casings his own strength could never manage, her keen eyes spotting pathways in the intricate circuitry that he missed, their 2 minds and 4 hands working in a seamless, unlikely partnership. The other watched from a distance, their trust placed not in his strange tools, but in the unwavering faith their strongest warrior had placed in him, a faith that had already delivered them one impossible victory. He finally found it deep within the machine's core, a communications array of breathtaking complexity, capable of sending a tightly focused signal across interstellar distances. It was a direct line to the zookeepers, a chance to speak to the gods who had played with their world for centuries. The question that hung heavy in the air of their makeshift workshop was what a tribe of technologically primitive giants and one stranded human scavenger could possibly say to a power of that magnitude. A declaration of war would be suicidal, a plea for mercy would be ignored. As he stared at the glowing interface, the answer came to him with the simple, brutal clarity of a perfectly executed gambit. Their greatest weapon was not the drone's technology, but the fact that they were using it at all. Their success in capturing the machine was an anomaly, a statistical improbability that would have sent alarms ringing through the collectors' data banks. The contamination of the experiment was their leverage. They would not threaten a war they couldn't win. They would threaten the one thing their dispassionate scientific enemy truly valued, their precious long-term research. With Amber and a now fully convinced listening intently, he outlined his message, an ultimatum wrapped in a virus. It would be a simple, elegant piece of code, a logic bomb he would attach to the transmission, designed not to destroy the collector's systems, but to specifically target and corrupt every file related to the preservation initiative. The transmitted message would be simple and direct, a declaration of sentience. We are aware. We are not your specimens. Cease all observation and interference. Your data on this world is now compromised. Any further contact will result in the total, irreversible corruption of all research related to this planet. Your experiment is over. Leave us in peace. It was a style challenge in its sheer, audacious defiance, but it was a battle that would be fought and won with a line of code, not a spear. The entire tribe gathered in the clearing as made the final preparations, the air thick with a tension that was almost electric. He powered up the drone one last time, its internal lights flickering to life, its red optic glowing with a faint, residual malevolence. With a final nod from Amber, he initiated the sequence. A low hum emanated from the machine as it broadcast their message into the void, a single, defiant shout across an ocean of stars. For a long, breathless minute, the drone hummed, and then with a final sighing whir, its lights went out for the last time. Its purpose served. They waited. They waited through the night, and through the next day, every warrior's eye cast toward the sky, expecting a response of fire and orbital bombardment. But the response, when it came, was not a sound, but a profound and spreading silence. The subtle background energy signatures that had been tracking for months, the invisible hum of the collectors, regulatory technology, began to fade one by one, like distant lights being switched off. The oppressive artificial pressure on the ecosystem seemed to lift, and for the first time in centuries, the planet was allowed to breathe on its own. The collectors, faced with an unacceptable level of contamination in their pristine laboratory, had made a logical, dispassionate choice. The experiment was ruined. It was more cost-effective to simply abandon the project and sterilize the data than it was to engage with the unpredictable, newly self-aware subjects. They did not respond with anger. They responded with the ultimate indifference, cutting their losses and turning their gaze to some other, less troublesome corner of the galaxy. They had won their freedom not in a blaze of glorious battle, but with the quiet, irrefutable power of an idea, a victory so complete and so silent it took days for them to fully believe it. In the seasons that followed began to heal, its wild, savage heart slowly finding a new, more natural rhythm. They for the first time were masters of their own destiny, their struggles now authentic battles for survival, not contrived tests. The changes in their society were profound and permanent. The knowledge of what had been done to them had forged a new kind of unity, a shared purpose that went beyond mere survival. Cleverness, once a curiosity, was now a treasured resource, and he worked with the and the other elders to introduce new ideas, concepts of sustainable agriculture, structural engineering, and long-term planning, tools that would allow them to build a future, not just endure a present. The culmination of this new era came during a celebration of the first true harvest. Before the entire tribe approached and with her own hands unfastened the stone collar from around his neck, letting it fall to the earth. She declared him no longer a claimed one, but a kinsman, a champion, and a son. Then, with a rare, genuine smile, she formally sanctioned the union between him and Amber, a bond forged not of ritual or property, but of a shared battle and a love that had the stars. That evening, Amber found him atop the largest of the ancient altars, their private sanctuary, looking out at the bruised twilight sky. The world was theirs now, truly and completely. He had the knowledge and the parts to repair the communication systems on his old, hidden ship, to send a distress call and return to his solitary life among the stars. But the thought of that life now felt like a ghost story, a tale of a lonely, wandering man he no longer was. Amber sat beside him, her immense form a comforting, solid presence in the growing dark. She did not ask him to stay, for their bond was beyond such questions. She simply took his hand, her large, warm fingers gently enveloping his, a silent gesture that held all the future he could ever want. He had come to this world seeking a treasure he could sell, a cold, crystalline power source. Instead, he had found something infinitely more valuable, a home, a purpose, and a fierce, magnificent love that had not only saved his life but had given it meaning. He turned to her, and as he reached up to kiss the giantess who had once tried to eat him, the act was not one of defiance, nor a promise of a future fight, but a quiet, profound, and final confirmation that his journey was over. He was home.